Hello everyone, my name is Nicole Fegan, and I love all kinds of films, really. Probably like once or twice a year a tweet will get big about someone talking about how like black and white films aren't worth it for like a whole host of reasons. So in this video I just want to talk about some of my favorite black and white films. Some of these films are in black and white just because that's what you did at the time, and some of these are a little bit more artistically curated. So these are 13 of my favorite black and white films from the 1930s through the 2010s. We're just gonna go in chronological order for this video because I feel like that makes the most sense. And starting with my first little section of films that were made when black and white was definitely the norm, the classic period, the 1930s to the 1940s, and up first we have It Happened One Night. This is directed by Frank Capra, and it came out in 1934. This is easily my favorite film from the 1930s. This is about a reporter and like this young heiress who end up stuck together because the bus that they were on leaves both of them behind, and so they end up having to like spend some time together. I know I've mentioned this before on this channel, but a few of the films on this list I watched for this class I took in college that was called, what was it? Hollywood and American Modernism from FDR to JFK, and this was one of those films, so I kind of got to watch it from a very academic angle, and this is just such a well-made romantic comedy. Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert have just like this insane chemistry. There's so much charm to this film. There's also, I wrote down in my notes, both like when I watched this originally and for this video, there's all these legs everywhere. It's kind of like comedically sensual. I also think Claudette Colbert was known for having like immaculate legs. I think this is a thing about her, and this film really like leans into that. I think the charm and the acting in the script is really the highlight of this film, but also there are a lot of really impressive filmmaking and set design things. There's this one, I don't know if it's an iconic scene or maybe just my favorite one, this one night that they spent together where they're kind of separated by a sheet, and that sheet scene, like when I think about this film, I think about both the metaphor of the sheet and like the visuals of this sheet up that separates the two of them, and it's just like, it's a really funny, really charming film, and if you've never checked out any film like from that early, from 1934 or something, I really, really recommend this. Next we have an iconic film that I actually saw for the first time this year. This was my first film back in theaters after, you know, like not going to a movie theater for over a year, and that is Casablanca, directed by Michael Curtiz, and this came out in 1942. This is about a man named Rick Blaine, played by Humphrey Bogart, who owns a nightclub in Casablanca, when suddenly one of his former lovers, played by Ingrid Bergman, arrives and sets off a chain of events. If you've ever heard the iconic line, oh god, I'm gonna butcher this, of all the gin joints in all the world, had to come into mind. God, I'm so sorry that I don't have that memorized, but like, I didn't know that was from this film, so you can imagine me in the seats like munching on my popcorn and being like, holy shit, that's from this. But like, this is one of those masterpiece films that just really lives up to its status. Humphrey Bogart is just like so effortlessly cool in this. I finished this film wanting to go buy like 1,000 cigarettes, and the chemistry he has with Bergman's character is just like out of this world. Something I really appreciate about a lot of the films from this era is I think they incorporate politics into like their noir and their romance really, really well. So like a large plot of this film is that Bogart's character has these like letters of transit that allow people to like travel freely throughout Europe that multiple characters in the film want. And like, while obviously there's this romance plot going on, that's probably like the main actual plot. And I think that just the way this film weaves together those two things of the romance and politics, I just think it's like masterful. This film also has a few very iconic shots, I think, specifically at the end. There's a shot of these two people walking that like definitely sticks out in my mind. There's not a ton else about the cinematography that really stands out to me. This is kind of a black and white film that again is in black and white just because it was the 40s, but like truly amazing. If you have not checked this out, you really gotta. The last two films I have in this like classic category are the two best film noirs I've ever seen, and up first we have Double Indemnity, which was released in 1944 and directed by Billy Wilder. In this film, a rich woman is working with an insurance policymaker to kill her husband and make it look like an accident so they can get the double indemnity policy, which means you get double the insurance if the death was an accident. This has like every single thing you could want from a film noir. You've got a femme fatale played by Barbara Stanwyck, who is just like so absolutely infectious in this film. She's beautiful, first off, and second off, like, I understand getting roped into that because I too could probably be persuaded to like get involved in a murder and a shady business deal if she was trying to persuade me to do it. It's very intense. You obviously have this romance plot going on between the woman and the policymaker, but like I also do feel like it goes to dark places, which I appreciate. Finally, while there's not a lot of like camera work I really remember about this film, I do really love the narrative framework. I believe the first scene kind of actually is from the end of the film where the man is like running into, I think, his office to call someone and is narrating a lot of what's going on. That's another classic film noir thing, is like the overhead narration, and I think this film just does it very well because we kind of have context for that narration early on. And yeah, this would probably be my favorite noir of all time if it wasn't for the next film, which I think takes the cake for me. But finally, for this category, we have Out of the Past, directed by Jacques Tourneur. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, and this was released in 1947. This stars Robert Mitchum, who I think is like my favorite actor leading man from this era. I don't know, we watched a few films that either like starred him or just had him in it in that class that I mentioned, and I love the way he acts, I love the way he looks. I just think he's like one of my favorite actors of all time, I think. But he plays this man named Jeff Bailey who owns a gas station and has a girlfriend in this small town, is a completely inconspicuous man when suddenly a man from his past comes to confront him, and he has to deal with and confront things from his past and go back to things from his past, out of the past. This is another film that has a great narrative framework because we learn a lot about his past when he's telling his girlfriend about what happened. I don't want to like tell everything about it, but he used to be this PI who was hired to go find someone's wife who had shot her husband and he had survived and taken a lot of the money, and while he's on this PI job, he obviously meets the woman, and surprise, surprise, this is a film noir, she's the femme fatale, they fall in love. There are so many complex dynamics in this film, which I think is why I love it so much. You kind of have a lot of this commentary on this small town vibe, and like, his girlfriend, who you kind of wonder throughout the thing, like, she's not a bad person, but then like when you watch the scenes of him and the other woman, the wife, like there's this clear chemistry going on, and like the wife's relationship with her husband, and just like there's so many connections in this film that I think make it so fascinating to watch. The aforementioned femme fatale wife character is played by Jane Greer, who is also beautiful, and I would kill for her. Like, it's just like she is an exceptional casting choice alongside Mitchum, who again, I just think is so fun to watch. Briefly, a quick fact break. So I think a lot of people think of The Wizard of Oz as the first ever color film, which is not true. There were color films before that, and that like once The Wizard of Oz happened, like films were in color from then on, which also is just not true. I mean, there obviously were films in color. There are films from the 40s that were in color that I watched for that class and just exist in the world. But it's not as clean cut as all that. Apparently in 1947, only 12% of American films were made in color, and by 1954 that number rose to over 50%. But then with TVs going into homes, and that was not in color yet, like production companies realized that like it's not actually worth it to make these films in color if when they're going onto people's TV screens it's just going to be in black and white, so it kind of stayed stagnant for a little bit. And it was not until the early 1970s that color film finally outsold black and white films. So the next little category is films from the 60s and the 70s that were kind of in this transitionary period where there obviously were films being made in color. There are many famous films from the 50s and 60s that are in color, but I feel like there were also a lot of films that were made in black and white. So it was a choice, but it's not quite the same choice as like if someone makes a black and white film now when like the majority of films are in color. So first I want to talk about La Dolce Vita, directed by Federico Fellini, which was released in 1960, and this is just one of my favorite movies of all time. If I wasn't doing one film by director on this list, I could just like have a whole section about Fellini, because this and 8½, and La Strada, and Nights of Cabiria are all in black and white and are all exceptional films. It wasn't until Juliet and the Spirits, which he released in 1965, that he really started doing things in color, so like Fellini's probably just one of my 2 or 3 favorite black and white directors. This film is split into various episodes of 7 mornings and 7 nights in the life of Marcello, played by Marcello Mastroianni, while he's trying to find life and love and happiness while living in Rome, and most of his endeavors are vaguely fruitless. I think this is a film that is so in love with life and also so skeptical of it. There are scenes upon scenes of just like, because he's a journalist, I feel like he's at this very observational viewpoint, and like there are constantly things that I feel like sometimes we're mocking and sometimes we're in awe of, and yet like underneath all of that, I think the thing that shines through for me are like these very human moments. The two scenes that I remember most from this film, one, he is out on a balcony just talking to one of his friends about life. They're talking specifically about how it is better to be loved than to love, and just like, that is a small little scene in this very grand film in Rome, but I remember that. And then there's another film where he is at like a museum and he has kind of this imagined conversation with a woman through the walls, and he is kind of a very like closed off character. He is not very forthcoming with his emotions, and so to see this vulnerability from this character that we've gotten to know over the course of this film is just like, it's such a beautiful moment. There are many ways in which this film feels kind of like heartbreaking and resigned, and yet I don't feel like it's completely devoid of hope. I don't think he is devoid of hope. I don't think Fellini's devoid of hope. I just think that like this constant trial and like cycle of people like reveals something about life but doesn't completely let go of the notion that there are good things. Next we have probably the singular most unique film on this list, and that is Logite, directed by Chris Marker, which was released in 1962. This was Chris Marker's first big film, but he did have one before this. What is it called? Letter from Siberia, which was in color. So this was a choice to be in black and white, but also like I feel like he had made a lot of other smaller things before this that were also in black and white. This is a 28-minute long photo film about a post-nuclear war effort to time travel. By photo film, I mean that it is almost entirely told in like snapshot images as there is narration overhead. And it is just so fucking heartbreaking. We're following this one man who was chosen for the experiment because of this particularly vivid memory he has of seeing this woman on this pier, or this jetty, Logite, so like that's why he's chosen, because like they have something that they think is a tether that he'll be able to time travel because of the technology they've discovered. You need to have like, I don't know, vivid memory or whatever. So he's chosen and we follow him. One of the reasons I love this film is it kind of, I think, redefines what film can be. Again, it's so short and there's camera work, but in stills. There's actually a few films on this list where the camera doesn't move. I find that very interesting and wonder how often that like coincides with black and whiteness, but I feel like the fact that the images are in black and white creates this cohesion and also just like makes sense for some reason to me. I just don't think this film would work as well in color. I feel like the going from image to image would feel kind of disjointed, and the fact that it's in black and white just gives it this like clarity and this linearity and this cohesion. Up next we have Persona, directed by Ingmar Bergman, which was released in 1966. When I was writing notes for this, I was like, alright Nicole, say Ingrid Bergman when it's Ingrid Bergman and Ingmar Bergman when it's Ingmar Bergman, and I'm so shocked that I got it right and didn't flub it up. All of Bergman's films were in black and white until All These Women, which was released in 1964, 2 years before Persona, but people don't seem to love that. And then there was Persona, and then a few more black and white films, and then everything after 1969 seems to be in color. So again, I just like say this info so that you know, like this is like a weird period where again, some things are being made in black and white, some things are made in color, and like whether or not it's an artistic decision or like a financial decision, I don't have all the facts for these things. But I think black and white was the right choice for this film because the cinematography in this is stunning. This is about a young nurse named Alma who is in charge of taking care of this actress who seems to be in good physical health, but she doesn't speak. They go off to a cottage so Alma can take care of her, but over time Alma is having trouble kind of differentiating between herself and the actress, whose name is Elizabeth. This is an odd film that I find both very haunting and also very comforting. It's kind of dealing with like this psychological drama, but at the same time, like the relationship between the two of them is weirdly comforting. This film is doing incredibly interesting things with like femininity and mental illness, and I feel like the camera work really supports that. I feel like this is a black and white film that feels more white than anything. I kind of see because they're out in this cottage and by the sea, I feel like there's a lot of like sky, space, and lightness. And then there are certain shots where like the two of them are contrasted against each other. There's like this one very famous shot that is like what I think of when I think of this film. And like, to me, this is one of the films in this list where like the camera work is inextricable from the film. It would not be the same if A, the camera work wasn't what it was, and B, I think if it wasn't in black and white, because I think that stark contrast between the black and white is like necessary for this film. Now we're jumping about a decade forward in time to a time when, yeah, most of the films being made were in color at this point, so black and white is definitely a choice. And up first for this section we have Eraserhead, directed by David Lynch, which was released in 1977. Eraserhead was David Lynch's first feature-length film, and this and The Elephant Man, which was released right after that, are in black and white, and then he transitions to color film. So again, that's just like to illustrate that like films were being made in color at this time, but like this film really feels like it belongs in black and white. Technically, here's what this film is about. Henry Spencer tries to survive his industrial environment, his angry girlfriend, and the unbearable screams of his newly born mutant child, but I remember so little of the beats of the plot. Part of that might be because I saw this once 2.5 years ago, but this is like a surrealism, horror, body horror film that has such a dreamlike quality that I feel like its plot matters so much less than everything else going on. Like, yes, I think there is so much you can dive into on this film thematically about like the fear of like fatherhood and working an industrial job, but also I think something that's kind of central to a lot of Lynch's work is this idea that like confusion is key, that, or like the lack of clarity is not a problem with the film. Because of its dreamlike quality, I feel like you focus instead on the sound design, which is immaculate, and the camera work, which is stunning, and the puppetry, which is awesome, and just like the general horror of it all. The way the film feels rather than like viscerally, rather than how it makes you think. This is the Lynch that I feel like I actually do remember least, and the one I'm most eager to rewatch. I'm watching The Elephant Man for the first time soon, and maybe that'll like inspire me to rewatch Eraserhead, but like this is just such a key film, and I cannot recommend it enough to people who like any Lynch but haven't seen this, and really to anyone out there. Up next, we have my personal favorite film of all time, and that is Stranger Than Paradise, directed by Jim Jarmusch, which was released in 1984. Jarmusch is my favorite director, and he's probably the other director up here that I would say is like my favorite black and white director, because you have this one in black and white. His first film, Permanent Vacation, which was released in 1980, was in color, but then two of his other biggest films, Down by Law, which was released in 86, and Dead Man, which was released in 95, they are also in black and white. So this was definitely an artistic decision. He is kind of credited with like starting the American independent film movement with this film, and I feel like its black and whiteness probably played a big part. So first, the plot. This is about a young man named Willie, who is a Hungarian living in Brooklyn, and his adventures with his pal Eddie, and then his 16-year-old cousin named Ava comes to stay with him for a little bit. She's supposed to only be there for a night, but she ends up staying for 10 days, and then she goes to live with Aunt Lottie, who I love, in Cleveland. Willie and Eddie go to see her, and then the three of them go to Florida. And that's the film! Stylistically, this is shot in long takes. The camera is somewhere and people move in and out of the shot. The camera doesn't move, and like you have like 6 to 10 minute long shots. Some of them are shorter than that, definitely, but like the big thing is that the camera doesn't move, creating, to me, kind of this photograph-like, or almost not like theater-like in that it's theatrical, but it feels very natural. People just moving in and out of the space, almost as if the camera isn't there at all. After every single long shot, there is a brief cut to black, and I feel like this film is just like such a brilliant portrait of like youth and minimalism that really like asks you to fill in the blanks of those cuts to black in a way that just moves me beyond words. From a pure enjoyment standpoint, I think all three of the characters are just like so unbelievably likable. Willie, who's played by John Lurie, is just like such a charming asshole at the beginning, and then as he gets to like, you know, he gets to know his cousin, who he doesn't really know very well. He gets to know Ava throughout the film. Like, there's just so much love there, and Ava is just a badass. All she wants to do is kind of walk around and explore and be included and listen to Screamin' Jay Hawkins. But along with that, in subsequent viewings, I think more than just like the pure enjoyment has arisen, and I think this film is kind of about like femininity in bohemian circles, because there's just so many times when like Willie and Eddie go off to do things and Ava's left behind, possibly because of her age, possibly because of her womanness. This film also has a lot to do, I think, with American culture. It's obviously relevant that she and Willie are Hungarian. They are not like born Americans. And this is just like my ultimate comfort film. I think it is slow and it is so, I don't even know if it's cozy, but like it's just so slow and nothing happens and I love it. And I think its black and whiteness is integral to the film because I think it has it has kind of a photographic quality because the camera doesn't move, and I think that works with it being black and white because it feels, I don't know, there's something kind of like antique about the film that I think the black and whiteness helps create. And my final film of this section is Tetsuo the Iron Man, directed by Shinya Tsukamoto, and this was released in 1989. This is his first feature-length film. I can't really find a lot about all the shorts that he did before this film, and the sequel of this is in color, but this, again, all the films I'm going to be talking about now are in black and white as a choice, and I think, obviously because I'm talking about them, it was the right choice. Alright, so this is a cyberpunk body horror film that is about this metal fetishist who has created a wound in his body where he wants to insert metal, but the wound now has maggots in it, so he kind of goes crazy, and then when he's out in the world, he gets run over by this man, and the man and his girlfriend try to like hide the body, but then he realizes that he has like a curse or disease, and he starts turning into iron. He is, you guessed it, the Iron Man. This film is so grotesque. I was so certain that I wasn't gonna like it because body horror is not often like good for me. I don't really vibe with it, but like this is just so well done that it didn't matter. I think the reason the black and white works for this film is a couple of reasons. One, I think the black and whiteness kind of gives this film a metallic quality. Like the whole film feels and looks like metal, and that is also supplemented by a lot of the lighting. There's a lot of flashy lighting, especially when people are working with metal, and it just feels very jarring in an oddly metallic way. I've seen this film be compared in certain ways to Eraserhead just because of kind of that like body horror weird like link, but this one I think is more overtly horrifying, a little more overtly body horror, but again, I just think it really, really works if you're down for that. It is a lot, but like if you're ready to sign on, it's fucking awesome. And then finally we have a big jump. I have no films on this list from the 90s or the 2000s. I know there are some pretty big films from those decades that are in black and white, but I just haven't found one that I love yet. So jumping to 2012 with Frances Ha, directed by Noah Baumbach. This is about a 27-year-old aspiring dancer played by Greta Gerwig who lives in New York City with her best friend until her best friend moves out to live with her boyfriend, and then she's kind of left adrift trying to figure out what to do with her life. When I first watched this, I was so ready to hate it within like the first few minutes. I'm from Long Island and I've about like 45 minutes from the city, and so I've been in the city a lot throughout my childhood, and I was like, how dare you show New York City in black and white? This is a place of neon, of color, of vibrancy, and like, you're gonna mute it? But I think as I kept watching, I kind of understood, and I definitely understand now. I think there kind of is a vintage quality to this film. It is very slice of life-y, and I think it kind of evokes a different time in certain ways. There's a quote that Baumbach has about the black and whiteness of this film that I want to read to you because I find it pretty interesting. It's near impossible to make a movie in black and white in this system. I wanted to reinvent how I could make a movie, and with technology as it is, there was an opportunity for it. The material felt black and white to me. I'm not 27 anymore, but there's something both old and new about the film, almost an instant nostalgia. At the same time, because you aren't distracted by color, there's more immediacy to it. But that's somewhat retrospective. I really just wanted to make a movie in black and white. What I like about that quote is I think there's truth to like both things he says. One, like as a director, I'm sure there's probably just like an appeal, like, can I do this? What will this film look like? Like, you want to experiment with the craft that you do. But at the same time, I also do feel like this was the material to do it with. I've seen a lot of bumbox films, and I don't think any of the other ones would have worked in black and white except for this one. This used to be one of my favorite films of all time. I kind of watched it a little bit too much over like the course of 2 years, so it's not quite like in the upper echelon for me anymore, but this is still an incredible film, and for anyone who hasn't seen it, I recommend it because still my favorite viewing was the first time I saw it. Next we have a movie that I saw for the first time this year, and it just blew me away, and that is Ida, directed by Paweł Pawlikowski, which was released in 2013. This is about a woman in 1960s Poland who was about to take her vows to become a nun, but before she does that, she kind of sets out to find out more about her family that she does not have a lot of information on. This is another film where the camera doesn't move, but they're not long takes. This is, oh my god. Sorry, I'm just thinking about the shots of this film. Whereas Stranger Than Paradise, I feel like creates this very natural environment where like the camera has almost no opinion. In Ida, every single shot feels like a carefully constructed photograph where the lighting and the design and the placement of characters feels so carefully constructed to the point of just like otherworldly beauty. This is another film that feels very sparse. Its black and whiteness, I think, creates this very like open, like the sky is never blue, it's always white. And so I feel like it feels very wintry and very sparse and very cold. I haven't talked a lot about the plot of this film, but like this deals with themes of identity and femininity and religion and sexuality, and obviously family, like just watching her discover details about her life and also like her kind of coming of age story, kind of this question of like, does she want to go down the path she's going down? And there's one shot, probably my favorite shot of the whole film, is when you first see her hair, she lets her hair down when she's like having this interaction with a man, which is so sensual. Jesus Christ, that scene, like what the hell? This might at the end of the day be like my favorite cinematography of any film ever. It is just like so stunning from shot to shot, and I want to rewatch it again immediately. And finally, the only film on this list that I saw in theaters when it came out is The Lighthouse, directed by Robert Eggers, released in 2019. This film was interesting just because I'm glad that I was able to watch the discourse about this film happen in live time. That has not been the case for any of the other films, so I feel like I kind of had a front row seat to people talking about this. This is about two men who are in charge of a lighthouse for a season in the 1890s. It's Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe, and good lord, this film rules. This film is a psychological thriller horror film as you watch these two men kind of lose it mentally because it's just the two of them up in this cold, rainy lighthouse where they have all this responsibility, and it's just so intense. The contrast of the colors in this film is truly remarkable. And also I think the black and whiteness kind of like is there to serve the sound design and like just the sonic overload of this film. One of the things I remember is how absolutely fucking loud this film is. Yeah, I just remember sitting there in theaters and being like, that was the noisiest film I've ever seen, because you have constant sounds of the sea and of the turning lighthouse, and I feel like because you don't have colors there to distract you, I don't actually know if that happens in film, but like I think because it's so sparse on the color palette, like the sound just really pops. The lack of color just somehow like highlights shadow and like even the character tension, and I think because it's set in the 1890s, it also helps evoke that earlier time. Obviously color existed in the 1890s, but I think just the black and white just like helps create that atmosphere. And this is just without a doubt my favorite, most recent black and white film that I really, really want to rewatch sometime soon. So those were 13 films. I think this video might have been very long, so thank you so much for sticking it out if you've watched all of this. I also did just want to mention some honorable mentions that were kind of on my short list but didn't make the final list. We've got The Third Man, Citizen Kane, Psycho, Andrei Rublev, Wings of Desire, which is partially in black and white, and Seconds. All great films, just not at the cream of the crop for me, but just wanted to mention that I'd seen those and liked those. Let me know your favorite black and white movie down in the comments. Maybe I've seen it, or maybe you'll give me something new to check out. But yeah, that is all I have for you today, and you will see me in the next one.